Team, it's Coach Jimmy here with what is probably the most popular video I'm going to ever make. It is a ultimate guide to compromise running for all of you Hyroxers, whether you're new, World Championship, veterans. Compromise running is something as a concept you're going to have to grasp, as a training stimulus you're going to have to get really good at and familiar with. It is something we are asked about every week. So I wanted to put together a really comprehensive video that goes through exactly what it is, how on earth we deal with all the challenges that it presents, and then actually give you something tangible to take away. At the end of this, I'm going to give you some workout examples of how you can integrate them and when you need to integrate them into your training program. Got some slides here because there's some concepts that I want to illustrate. There is a ton of information here. What I am going to do is try and keep this as simple as possible, so that whoever you are, whatever training and strength and conditioning background you have, you understand this. So bear with me with some of this, but hopefully you're going to take something away and be able to use it in your training. Before we dive into anything, we need to obviously define compromised running. Now, the first thing, guys, to note is that this isn't like a Hyrox specific concept. Really simply put, compromised running is running with fatigue. The influence of fatigue is impairing your ability to run. So with Hyrox, we are running 7 times, having done a workout station, right? The first one's fresh, straight out of the Red Bull tunnel. The rest, there is going to be some impact from the workout stations on our running performance. That is no different to a triathlete running off the bike or a CrossFitter running after doing some squats, for example. What is unique is that Hyrox really puts this ability to run compromised in the center of their event. The better athletes at Hyrox are those that deal with that challenge. What we're asking of a Hyrox athlete is a simple question. What is your maximal sustainable pace during the race? On each of the workout stations, on each of the 1 kilometer runs, how fast can you move without compromising your ability to keep moving that quickly? Sounds really simple. Let's find a pace and let's just stick to it, right? So why on earth is this thing so difficult? This is where we need to understand the physiology and psychology behind compromised running. I'm going to use an analogy to do just that. We have got 2 pictures on the screen here. We've got a rave on the left and somebody meditating on the right. And essentially, during a Hyrox event, you are trying to have a rave and meditate all within an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long the event takes you. We are mixing modalities. We're mixing the really hard sled push that jacks up your heart rate, that really taxes your leg with every single step, with running that should be polar opposite to that. When we jump on those sleds, we are having to work really, really hard with every single step. Now, contrary to that, with running, we're trying to find almost like a meditative, metronomic pace, right? You're running for a long period of time each time. So we need the body to find a way of being super efficient, bring the heart rate down, get the breathing under control. Now, that's quite confusing. If you went straight from a rave to try and meditate, or from a meditation session to a rave, your brain's going to be a little bit confused. And that is exactly what you're trying to do in a Hyrox race. You're trying to essentially pull the body in 2 different directions. And that's why it's so difficult. And the consequences, the challenges of that are many. And we need to understand them before we start thinking about dealing with compromised running in general. So what I've done is bucket the challenges that compromised running presents into physical and mental challenges. I'm going to go through them briefly, and then, as I said at the end, show you how we can kind of teach our body to overcome them throughout our training program. Now, the first of which is a bit technical, but as I said at the start, I'm going to try and keep this really simple. I've got 2 images on here. I've got a sprinter, somebody that moves really, really fast for a short period of time. I've got a cyclist that moves for a long period of time at a less intensive effort. Our body produces energy in a couple of different ways. And it is different because the body has different ways of producing energy, and their efficiency and their ability to produce that energy is different in speed. So with a sprinter, the body predominantly relies on a process called anabolic metabolism. Again, let's keep this simple. The process of producing energy in a sprint is really, really fast. It needs to be, right? You're moving really quickly. The body can do that well. We've got some fantastic sprinters in the world, but it can only do it for a really short period of time in this pathway. And that is because during that pathway, it produces lactate as a byproduct. Now, lactate actually, to begin with, can be used to produce energy itself. But that process is similarly not very efficient. It's quite slow. When the body can't use lactate for energy quicker than it is producing it as a byproduct, it starts to accumulate. And that gives you that really burny sensation in your legs or whatever muscle groups you're using, and ultimately causes you to slow down. During a sprint, if we looked at an untrained athlete and we got them to sprint as fast as they could, it is very likely that they are going to tense up, they're probably going to hold their breath, and ultimately they're going to blow up really, really fast. If we put somebody that's never used a sled before and got them to push it 25 meters, the chances are very similarly, they're going to try really hard, probably not breathe, go a bit white in the face, and ultimately stop really, really quickly. Now, on the flip side of that, we've got, in this instance, a cyclist, but in Hyrox, we have our running. Now, when we're doing something over a longer distance, obviously, we need to lower the intensity. The effort needs to be less. We're going to rely then on a different pathway for producing energy, and that is the aerobic pathway, or we're going to rely on the process of aerobic metabolism. That is way more efficient. It's slower at producing energy, but it can do it for a really long period of time. Now, in the case of cycling, in the case of running, if we're doing something for a long period of time, we're doing the same thing over and over again. We want to find that meditative state that I was referring to earlier. We want to find a cadence and a rhythm that's almost metronomic. Your breathing is controlled, you're relaxed, you're probably taking in oxygen through your nose, you're probably breathing out through your mouth, you're thinking clearly, you may even be able to talk. Again, they're two very different messages and processes for the body to deal with. So you can only imagine that when you're trying to switch between the two, which we have to do in a Hyrox race, it's going to get quite difficult. The other thing to bear in mind is what I was talking about just then with the breathing. Obviously, there's a little thing in the world called oxygen that we need in order to do anything, and even more so when we're doing exercise. When we're doing high intense exercises, we start to breathe a little bit faster because we're trying to get in more oxygen as our muscles start to work a little bit harder and require that oxygen. Now, at some point, you're going to create what's called an oxygen debt, and that is that you are needing more oxygen than you can get in through your nostrils and your mouth. The body requires more oxygen than you can provide it. During the sled pushes and the sled pulls, for example, they require more effort per meter than a run. So you're having to work a little bit harder, your heart rate's going to increase, your requirement for oxygen for your muscles to do what they need to do is a little bit higher. This has consequences, as at some point you're going to have to slow down, and in the race you're not going to want to do that, right? Especially when you're trying to move on to a run. The other thing to note is that process of switching over to a slower, more aerobic effort takes a little bit of time for the body to get used to. So if you go out too hot, if you go out at an unsustainable pace, or you try a little bit too hard on the sleds, it's going to take a little bit of time for your body to catch up. And that's going to take a bit of time for you to get used to and understand that even though in the moment coming off the sleds, when you're looking like I am on the right-hand side there, your body will catch up. It can catch up. Once you've lowered that intensity and given it a chance, you'll be okay in just a second. That takes a bit of practice. Lastly, the physical challenge that compromised running, in my opinion, presents that most people just look past is that you are, by definition, running with a fatigued body. Those sleds, the wall balls, the lunges, the ski erg are all taxing the same muscle groups you're going to need on the run. The same function, the same coordination of movement patterns that you have to display in the workout stations are the ones that we use on running. If you don't initially build up an awareness of how to run and understand that once your hamstrings and your quadriceps and your hip flexors and your core are compromised, how that changes your running form and how you overcome it by thinking about particular cues, then you are going to create inefficiencies within the Hyrox race whilst you're running that are ultimately going to lead you to slowing down. Okay, that's physical, but what about the mental stuff? Because if you've done a Hyrox before, you're going to understand that at some point in the race, it's going to get tough. At some point, you're going to question what on earth you're doing. And we need some degree of self-awareness and mental fortitude, because you are going to be tested probably to your limit, regardless of how you approach the race. The mental challenges that compromised running presents are largely around your awareness of what it is like to run compromised. That sensation of running on like hollow, heavy, spongy legs is not very nice. And without having experienced it and actually gone through the process of overcoming it, it's very difficult to prepare mentally. Your body is phenomenal. It is phenomenal at processing that lactate that I was talking about. It is absolutely sensational at covering off that oxygen debt. If you leave that sled push or sled pull, as I said, feeling like you can't move, the chances are, if you didn't know that in 20 seconds time your body's going to catch up, you would stop and you would start walking. Those that are more familiar with that process of overcoming that lactate accumulation, that are better at overcoming that oxygen debt, more aware of it, and have also trained that process to be more efficient, you are going to slow down and ultimately spend more time in the rock zone. So part of your training needs to include training these transitions, training quote unquote compromised running. But the most important part of your Hyrox training program, how effective you are and how optimal you are as an athlete, is going to be when and the process of how you integrate compromised running sessions. And that's the bit I think that we can make the most progress on as a sport and as a group of athletes. So I'm going to talk you through that next. Now, the process in which you prepare for a Hyrox race may differ depending on your training background, your age, etc., etc. But I would like to see every athlete go through a similar process to this. From as far out as you can afford to start training or want to start training for a Hyrox race, we're going to go through a process known as general physical preparedness. Now, during that process, we are not only trying to build a huge aerobic base, we're also trying to get as strong as we can, but let's just focus on running for now. In that phase, for as long as you can possibly stomach starting training for a Hyrox race, we are trying to build both volume in our training and intensity. But initially, the key ingredient is to increase your ability to do more and recover faster, i.e. to handle more volume. The reason for that is if we can handle more volume, if we can recover from that faster, we can start to layer in intensity. And the more the body gets used to dealing with that intensity as well, the better we are going to be accustomed to training at a higher intensity come race day. Now, During that GPP phase at the start, because we are training high volume, the intensity can't be quite as high. And a great thing about that is that it gives you some clarity, some headspace to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it, instead of just burying yourself during training sessions. And this is where we're going to start to learn how to run properly. We're going to start to play around with different shoes. We're going to start to play around with different nutrition approaches just for our sessions. But ultimately, you are trying to learn to run efficiently. Understand what the running stride should look like, what it should feel like. We're trying to stretch out our running sessions to, roughly speaking, the same length in time as you think the race is going to take you. And if you can do that for multiple weeks, if you can run for, say, 90 minutes, week on week, you're going to start to get a sense for what it feels like to run on tired legs. But the most important thing in this stage is that you are just running. Don't confuse the body with the workout stations. Don't confuse the body with trying to mix modalities. You are just running and getting good at running. So what should training sessions look like during that period of time? Firstly, as I said, we are looking predominantly at building aerobic capacity. That is your ability to run for longer at a lower intensity. But as I said at the start, the energy systems that we talk through, the aerobic and the anaerobic, aren't completely interdependent. So independent, they are somewhat interdependent. So there's three key sort of running sessions that we want to include in our training. The first is those zone 2 runs. So as I just said, your ability to run further for longer. The second are some form of interval running. You're never going to get better at running fast unless you run fast. So in those sessions, we are running quickly for a short period of time, giving the body a chance to recover with either some standing recovery or some walking or slower jogging, and then we're going again. We're teaching the body, as I said, to run quickly and recover. Thirdly, we're looking at some sort of threshold run. So this is another concept for you to get your head around. Threshold essentially refers to the pace at which you can run just below the point at which your body struggles to deal with that lactate that we talked about. There is going to be a tipping point at which point your body can't keep up. It starts to accumulate and we have to slow down. Just below that point, just below that pace, we would refer to that as your threshold. Now, running at that and learning what that pace is and what it feels like is ultimately going to be similar to the pace you're going to hold at the Hyrox race. So we want to spend some time in that general physical preparedness phase, figuring out what that pace is. Let's give you an example then. So this is one of the running sessions from our Hyrox programs at Hybrid Athlete Club. If we just look at the main workout section there, we've got five sets of a 4-minute effort, slightly quicker than our target pace for the Hyrox race, with a 1-minute recovery. So as I said, this would be one of our interval runs. We're running a little bit faster than we want to. We're letting a little bit of lactate accumulate, and then we're asking the body to deal with that lactate, get our breathing back under control, lower our heart rate in that 1-minute recovery. We could progress this by making the rest duration shorter or the effort duration longer, or we could scale it by flipping that. So making the effort shorter and the rest a little bit longer. Once the body has learned to run properly, once we have started building up that base, that foundation of running capacity, we are then going to think about some sport-specific adaptations. Now, these are when we start layering in some of the other Hyrox movements. And we're going to start to do this, generally speaking, 2 to 3 months out from the race. Now, in this, we are still focusing on power and speed. We're wanting to keep the interference from other movements under control. So we aren't trying to do every movement. We're not trying to do a simulation at this point. We're just starting to learn what a movement does to our running. So an example here would be 4-time, 120 wall balls. Every 3 minutes, we go for a run. So we are somewhat starting to confuse the body, but it's still within a controlled state. We can see quite clearly and feel quite clearly how the warbles affect our running and how the running affect our warbles. As we get closer and closer to the race, we start to think about making things really, really specific to Hyrox and the event that we are doing. And this is where the traditional compromised running that you see, the simulations that you see on Instagram, etc., would start to be utilized. In this scenario, we are trying to replicate as closely as possible the situation we're going to be in at the event. And that is, you're going to do lots of runs followed by lots of workouts. So as an example, we have 6 1-kilometer efforts. After each, we're doing some sort of exercise that is going to influence our ability to run afterwards. Now, the difference here between the race is that we're not only going for a shorter period of time than the race is asking for, but also, if you see at the bottom there, we have a 2-minute rest built in. We aren't training for Hyrox by doing Hyrox, the event. We are starting to learn how the body deals with that fatigue, giving ourselves 2 minutes to just stop, think, regain our thoughts, regain our composure, and then go again. A really big misconception, a really big error that we see is that people doing lots and lots of simulations, essentially doing a whole Hyrox before they do a whole Hyrox, which just doesn't make any sense. We are trying to teach the body how to do something and then test ourselves come race day, not test ourselves before the test. I really hope that that 20 minutes has given you something that you can take away. Those examples there show progression through a training program. We gave you some idea of the time in which you would want to incorporate those sessions. Ultimately, there was a lot there, though. And I would love to help you out and kind of apply this to you on an individual basis. So you're either coming across this video on YouTube, in which case, please do reach out if you've got any questions, or you're seeing this on our compromised running page. And if you've made it this far, you can scroll down and see that we've got some Hyrox programs available. And all of this stuff is figured out for you. We've done the hard work, we've done the legwork, we've put together a program that progresses through those stages that I talked through. You just need to follow that program. So feel free to check out the programs out on the Hybrid Athlete Club. If you've got any questions or want to talk through this in a bit more detail, then reach out to me. I hope you have a fantastic training period before your race. I will see you soon, very soon at a Hyrox.